This lecture series is co-sponsored by the Institute for the Study of Judiciary, Politics, and the Media, which I direct. My name is Keith Bybee, and the Tully Free Speech Center, directed by Professor Handsome here, stage right, Roy Gutterman of Newhouse School. This series brings in distinguished practitioners and commentators from around the country to address issues kind of under the broad umbrella of law, politics, and the media. And today we have someone who will actually, I think, be touching on all parts, all three legs of that law, politics, and the media stool. Our speaker is Mr. Tom Devine. Mr. Devine is the legal director for the Government Accountability Project, and that is the nation's leading whistleblower protection and advocacy organization. Mr. Devine has assisted over 5,000 whistleblowers over the course of his career in defending themselves against retaliation. He has also participated in campaigns to pass or defend or improve major national and international legislation, actually over 20 different instances. He is the recipient of the Hugh Hefner First Amendment Award, and also the Defender of the Constitution Award, the latter of which is bestowed by the Fund of Constitutional Government. And in 2006, he was inducted into the Freedom of Information Act Hall of Fame. He is co-author most recently of the Corporate Whistleblower Survival Guide, a hand guide for committing to the truth. And he's going to speak to us today about whistleblowers. The title of his talk is Whistleblowers, Essential Voices for Accountability. As part of the speaker series, we like to be timely, often ripping our topics from the headlines. And here's a piece that appeared in yesterday's New York Times, Pursuit of the Whistleblowers, about some individuals who have filed a suit against the Food and Drug Administration for what they see as improper practices there. So whistleblowing is something that's a part of the news on a daily basis. And I think, as Mr. Devine will tell us today, it's an important part of American politics and government. A few comments about how we're going to proceed today. Mr. Devine will lecture for about 35 minutes, and then we'll have opportunity for question and answer. We'll end at 5 o'clock and have in this room a reception, which is a continued opportunity for discussion about the topic and with the speaker. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Devine.
Thank you very much for honoring the Government Accountability Project and myself with this invitation. And this is a talk about transparency, the law connected with transparency. I think you folks have a right to know what is the Government Accountability Project. And we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, for most of our life a public interest law firm under the tax code, whose mission is helping whistleblowers. Whistleblowing, like truth and beauty, is all in the eye of the beholder. Depending on my actions, a whistleblower may be my savior or my worst nightmare, my worst enemy. And so let's get down to definitions. Who are the people that our organization serves? These are individuals, generally employees, who use free speech rights to challenge abuses of power that betray the public trust. It's a subset of the First Amendment, but one that I think, I hope you'll agree with me, is, if not the most significant subset of it, unsurpassed in terms of its impact on society. And we help whistleblowers in 4 ways at GAP. First, we defend them against retaliation. We go into court and have numerous trials. We organize legal campaigns, like political campaigns, for solidarity behind them and the abuses of power that they're challenging. And that's probably the bulk of our work at GAP, is defending these folks against retaliation. The second way, though, is that we help them to make a difference. Very frequently, when you challenge some type of abuse of power, The tidal wave of retaliatory counterattacks makes it really impossible to follow through on your original dissent. That almost gets lost in the shuffle, in the struggle for survival, professional survival, and many parts of the world, personal, physical survival. And that's no coincidence. And so we will take that ball and run with it. And in the process, expand the whistleblower's knowledge from a beachhead to a lot of territory. Usually a whistleblower who is in good faith and has seen something significant that's wrong has very in-depth knowledge about one piece of a larger puzzle. And you need the other pieces to really find out what happened. So we do investigations that have taken affidavits from up to 100 witnesses supporting the pioneer whistleblower. The third way that we help is by relentlessly working to strengthen the laws protecting this type of free speech. And I won't repeat, but we've led the campaigns to pass or defend all of America's national whistleblower laws. And since the millennium, that's extended to the international level also. And we worked with the Organization of American States and drafted their model whistleblower protection statute with professors at American universities, Washington School of Law. We worked with the Deputy Secretary General at the United Nations to develop a whistleblower policy for UN employees and contractors. We did that at the World Bank also. They've adopted one in the African Development Bank. These are all policies which have institutionalized public freedom of expression at institutions that formerly gagged their employees from any communications with the outside world that didn't have prior approval. The final way that we help whistleblowers is sharing our lessons learned. We write articles all the time. We get them on television, on the newspapers. Several of our clients have been on 60 Minutes this year. They're in the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post, the stories. And as we'll see in our discussion, that's a very, very important part of the strategy is sharing their knowledge. But a lot of it's educational, too, such as accepting invitations like this one. We have an American Whistleblowers Tour now. It's going from campus to campus in a core of faculty trying to integrate the research on this issue into law school and business school curricula. We host foreign visitors all the time. Probably about 4 times a month. There's some group from one country or another in the world that we try to plant those seeds with. And we write law review articles. We teach a clinic connected with the University of District of Columbia School of Law. We write books sharing our lessons learned and our knowledge, so it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel. And as a recruiting pitch, in the summer we have a very active program of full-time interns. And when you work full-time at Gap, if you can handle the responsibilities, you kind of move into a partnership role. I don't really care what somebody's pedigree is if they're dedicated and they're willing to work their heads off. So it's a real opportunity to be right in the front lines of this type of activism. Well, that's more than enough about the Government Accountability Project. So let's go a little bit more into whistleblowers. And from the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid movie, showing my age, but some of you probably have seen it. Who are these guys? Well, there's nothing magical about the word whistleblower. In some countries, they're called bell ringers, after the people who climb church towers and warn the bells to help the town learn of impending danger. In other nations, they're called lighthouse keepers, after those who shine the light on rocks that otherwise would sink ships. But no matter what label we give these folks, these are people exercising freedom of speech when it counts the most. Now, it's easy to have free speech at a sports event where in the Carrier Dome, where it's 33,000 people, seeing the referee call the foul on the visiting team instead of the Syracuse player, or vice versa. Probably there'd be a protest if it were called on the Syracuse player and it were mistaken. But it's very difficult to retaliate against 20 or 30,000 people. And when they're calling names and exercising their free speech rights with gusto against the referees, well, they're not exposing a secret. Everybody saw it. Everybody in the Carrier Dome, everybody watching it on television. And it's a lot different for whistleblowers. They may be the one or two people who know the truth about something which is going to be very threatening to the power structure, extremely dangerous, but much more significant exercise of freedom of speech. And there's really 4 ways that this activity manifests itself. The first way is what we usually think of, the freedom to protest. And that's no particular format for it. It can range from demonstrating in the streets to appearing on television or being a source for the newspaper article or testifying in Congress or even appearing in a government prosecution as a witness in litigation against corruption. No matter what the context, this is very important because whistleblowers are the agents of accountability. You can't enforce the laws unless human beings are willing to bear witness and testify. So we have to have these people for a system of justice to operate. There's a second form of free speech that they use, though, that I think is even more significant, and that's the freedom to warn. Through this type of free speech, whistleblowers can prevent avoidable disasters before it's too late for anything except damage control, picking up the pieces, and pointing the finger. And while it's important to hold people responsible, that's not much solace for the families of victims from accidents or tragedies that never should have happened if we'd only been listening. And in that context, for enlightened organizations, whistleblowers can be the best resource that there is for organizational leaders who otherwise would be blindsided by misconduct covered up in the middle of their bureaucracy. And they don't even know about it until they're being called on to explain what went wrong and being blamed and held responsible. It's very interesting. PricewaterhouseCoopers did a survey in 2006 of quite a few thousand corporations. I don't want to take a chance on saying the wrong number, many thousands in 40 different countries. And they found that 96% of corporate whistleblowers actually operate within the company. They never break ranks. They're engaged in dissent on behalf of the organization, not to attack it. And that whistleblowers in these corporations were responsible for exposing and catching more fraud than the audit departments, the internal compliance departments, and law enforcement combined. These are people who have a lot to offer if we listen. And when I give speeches to business groups, usually the title of those speeches is, it's bad business to kill the messenger. The third way that they exercise freedom of speech, to me, is even more fundamental, not significant, and that's challenging conventional wisdom. Now, what do I mean by that? It doesn't necessarily involve corruption or things. Well, let's give you an illustration. Less than 1,000 years ago, the conventional wisdom was that the world was as flat as this table and the rest of the universe circled around us. Well, thanks to Galileo and Copernicus, we learned better. But they were challenging the scientific powers that be of their era. And they got the whistleblower treatment. Galileo spent the rest of his life under house arrest. But thank goodness for their dissent. They were the founders of modern science. And that's the point that I want to make. Whether they're right or wrong, whether we love or hate them, people who exercise this type of free speech are the pioneers of change. They keep the power structure on its toes. They keep our society from being stagnant. And they make a real difference. But don't just take my word for it. Let's give you some examples, some illustrations of the principles that I've been advocating here. We'll start out with big picture, macro picture, False Claims Act. This is a law which allows whistleblowers to file lawsuits, to do more than just make noise, but to actually go to court in private attorney general actions on behalf of the taxpayers to challenge fraud in government contracts. Well, before the False Claims Act was overhauled and modernized and given this authority in 1986, the previous year, 85, the Justice Department collected about $26 million from fraud in government contracts. That was a big year for those folks. Normally they get about 6 to 9. That was the norm, usual range. Well, in the 25 years since whistleblowers were deputized, the average has been over $1 billion in recoveries each year. The last 4 years, it's been over $3 billion in recoveries. We expect $6 billion next year. This is America's most effective anti-corruption statute. And it's because it empowers the whistleblowers. Well, I'll give you another example involving consumer protection. Dr. David Graham, an FDA scientist, is one of our clients. He blew the whistle on Vioxx, the super painkiller from a class of drugs that the pharmaceutical industry was making over $1 billion a year in profits from. Well, thanks to Dr. Graham, we learned that Vioxx was a killer painkiller. It was responsible for over 50,000 unnecessary fatal heart attacks of the people who took it to alleviate the pain of arthritis or migraines. That's about as many Americans as died in the Vietnam War. Only they were killed by a drug that our government officially decreed was safe. And they would have kept getting killed if it hadn't been for a whistleblower. A month after he exposed the truth, committed the truth as we call it, Merck had to take Vioxx off the market because there were $400 billion in lawsuits from the victims' families. I will give you another example involving the environment. The Hanford Nuclear Waste Reservation. It's where we store all of America's plutonium and other radioactive waste from nuclear weapons or nuclear power plants. Plutonium is one of the, if not the, one of the most toxic poisonous substances in the world. You have to keep it isolated for 240,000 years before it'll kill you if you touch it. I mean, this is very dangerous stuff. And about 10 years ago, the contractor running the Hanford Waste dump held a press conference and announced they had lost 10,000 gallons of radioactive waste. They said not to worry, it couldn't get into, it would just be absorbed in the rocks, couldn't get into the water supply or anything, and they were just being honest. Well, thanks to a whistleblower who worked for that contractor, we learned the truth. It was 4 billion gallons of radioactive waste that they'd lost. And we sent divers down into the Columbia River, the water supply for the Pacific Northwest. There were already traces of radiation in the water from these releases. Thanks to a whistleblower, they went into an intensive cleanup program. Give another example. This next example involves human rights. Actually, no, we should do another one on the environment, toxic incinerators. Thanks to whistleblowers around toxic incinerators, which were burning materials next to churches, in schoolyards, in poor communities in the South, And their official records were that everything they were burning was legal, and there was no dangerous pollution coming out of it. Well, we got the real records from the whistleblowers. They were burning arsenic, dioxin, the substance for Agent Orange in Vietnam, mercury, heavy metals, lead, horribly poisonous things. Right next to people going to church were kids and lying about it. And thanks to the whistleblowers, those plants had to either shut down or move out into areas away from population. Well, let's go into human rights. This was 6 years ago. A common practice in our country, I'm ashamed to say, is that when visitors would enter from foreign nations, come to the airport, they would be arbitrarily stopped and accused of drug smuggling without any evidence. Generally attractive women. If customs agents couldn't find any drugs in their luggage, they do body cavity searches. If anyone's not familiar with that, that's where you don't just look on the outside of a person, but you look on the inside too, every place you can. And if they didn't find any drugs then, they'd take them to hospitals. They'd be subjected to laboratories testing for up to 4 days. During this time, they couldn't contact a lawyer. They couldn't contact their families. They didn't have any rights. It was like their bodies were the property of the Customs Bureau. Well, thanks to Kathy Harris, a customs inspector who blew the whistle, that time was changed from 4 days to 2 hours before people entering our country get the same rights as U.S. citizens would have. She really made a difference. Let's go into privacy. Over the last couple of years, we've represented whistleblowers. Some were contractors with telephone companies. Some were working for the National Security Agency. They've exposed that contrary to the Patriot Act, which a lot of civil liberties activists thought was horrible invasion of our rights, that the boundaries of the Patriot Act have been ignored in practice. The law says that you can only engage in domestic surveillance of people from other nations or American citizens who are working with them. And you have to get a warrant to do it before you can listen in on their conversations. Well, thanks to whistleblowers, we learned about an NSA program that was bought in with all the major telecoms, except for Q West, whose CEO was then prosecuted and imprisoned. That meant our intelligence agencies were receiving all electronic domestic communications. Everything on emails, any websites that you visited, any mobile telephone conversations, everything. Indiscriminate. This isn't in dispute anymore. We wouldn't have known that Big Brother had moved into all of our households, living sometimes on the computer, sometimes moving over to the phone, but there constantly. And it's thanks to whistleblowers that we're aware of this. I'll give you another example involving the opposite end of the spectrum, defending our country against terrorists. There's an Air Marshal whistleblower's court appeal I've been working on recently, Robert MacLean. And in 2003, he and all the other Air Marshals were alerted that there was a that we had confirmed through counterintelligence agencies, the plans for a more ambitious rerun of 9/11. This time, the hijackers wouldn't just attack Washington, D.C., they'd attack West Coast cities and European capitals. And it was going to be the climax. Every air marshal in the country was called in and given emergency training, so we'd be ready. 2 days into the training, in about 3 days before the, about 5 days, let me exaggerate, before the hijacking, the training was all canceled, And the air marshals all received a text message, uncontrolled text messages on their cell phones, to cancel all the long-distance missions. And cancel, in particular, immediately cancel all their overnight hotel reservations for those missions. Well, this meant that our government would be AWOL during the hijacking. It was confirmed for those types of flights. Well, we later learned the reason behind this was that the federal air marshals had blown their budget. They'd spent gobs of money on buddy system contracts to upgrade their information systems. It didn't work, but they ran out of money 2 months before the end of the fiscal year. And the only way they were going to get through the end of the fiscal year without having to explain what had happened to it to Congress was by ending all overnight hotel reservations. So that's what they did. Well, this Air Marshal, Robert MacLean, said, this is crazy. So he went to his boss. He said, I know it's crazy. There's nothing you can do about it. Keep your mouth shut. So then he went to the Inspector General. And the IG told him the same thing. Look, the only thing you're going to accomplish is to get fired. You got a good career ahead of you. Just leave it alone. Well, Robert was a whistleblower, so he wasn't going to leave it alone. He then went to MSNBC and shared the information with them. They reported on it on a Sunday night. Next morning, Monday morning, President Bush was confronted at his press briefing. This was in 2003. He couldn't, August 2003, he couldn't defend what had happened. He didn't know what had happened. The members of the Senate and the oversight committees held their press conference then. Mad as heck, not going to take it. They're going to hold hearings on this. They were outraged. This was insane. This was absurd. Within 48 hours of blowing the whistle, TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, issued a release that it had all been a mistake and that they wouldn't be canceling the coverage. And it wasn't canceled. The training resumed. The hijacking was prevented. Well, 3 years later, you'd think that the president should have said, I want to know who did this so we can give him a medal. Well, the bureaucracy did want to know who did it. They were very interested who did it. Because, the whistleblower made them look pretty foolish. So they conducted investigations for 3 years until they found out who had done this. And then they retroactively, ex post facto, 3 years later, decided that the information was secret, call it sensitive security information, and retroactively marked it secret, although it was completely unrestricted at the time that it was received, and fired Mr. MacLean for breaching security by disclosing sensitive security information, and this endangered our country. Well, his case is on appeal right now. We're fighting it tooth and nail. But it shows the difference that whistleblowers can make and the reaction to them. I'll give you another example involving national security. Franz Gaya. Franz is the science and technology advisor for the Marine Corps. And he went over to the Iraq theater and came back and blew the whistle at the behest of the generals in the field. Because the procurement bureaucracy was sitting on a whole fleet of mine-resistant armored vehicles. They're called MRAPs, that would keep our soldiers from dying or being crippled for life when they ran over a landmine in Iraq. These MRAPs had been in a warehouse waiting to be shipped for 1.5 years. During that time, the failure to deliver them, later confirmed by the Inspector General, was responsible for about 1/3 of our combat casualties, close to 1,000 of the soldiers who died, because we hadn't delivered the MRAPs that would protect them. And we later learned the reason for this. Well, the MRAPs would have, if they were delivered, that would be the end for Humvee, who was the manufacturer of the the inferior ones that were allowing our troops to be killed or maimed. And Humvee was the favorite of the procurement bureaucracy, and so they just didn't deliver the competition. Well, Mr. Gaya was, he should have gotten a medal too. In fact, Secretary of Defense, Secretary Gates, thanked the media for alerting him to this problem so that he could take care of it and get the equipment that actually protected our troops. Well, why did he have to thank the media? Because when Mr. Gale tried to warn General Petraeus, I'm the secretary, he was gagged. His planned briefing was canceled. He was reprimanded for disturbing the higher-ups in the chain of command and suspended for it. He's threatened with criminal prosecution when he went to brief Congress because, as the Marines lawyer told me, he stole government property. That was intellectual theft of government property. I don't understand what he's saying. So everything that he briefed Congress on, he learned on the job with the Marines. And he stole our property and gave it to the legislature. And I mean, the man was so angry, he was shaking about this. He had a security clearance yanked on hopelessly pretextual charges. When the Office of Special Counsel, the Whistleblower Protection Agency, this summer got his clearance back, his first day back on the job, he was demoted and stripped of all his science and technology duties. Whistleblowers make a real difference, and that's why it is so dangerous. And it's not just in the United States either. Let's go to an intergovernmental organization that's closely connected to the United States, the World Bank and World Bank President Paul Wolfowitz, the genius who was the mastermind of the Iraq War. And President Bush sent him to the World Bank to clean up corruption in the rest of the world. Well, as we learned from whistleblowers, his primary credential was teaching how to engage in corruption. And within 2 months of the first whistleblower bringing the evidence to us at GAP about all of his personal conflicts of interest, he was forced to resign. Whistleblowers can make a difference. The truth is very, very powerful. Or I'll give you another example involving the European Commission. An honest auditor named Paul Van Buitenen discovered that all the members of the Commission were receiving bribes for procurement. Procurement, government contract, it's the capital of corruption worldwide, globally. It doesn't matter ideology, political party. That's where the action is at for corruption. And the ringleader for the bribery was Edith Cresson, the president of the European Commission, French woman who's the president of the EC. The bag man, the guy who delivered all the money, was her dentist. Well, there was a lot of retaliation against Mr. Van Buitenen, but he wouldn't back off. He was a pit bull. He prevailed in the end. All the commissioners had to resign, as did President Cresson, and her dentist went to jail. I could keep going for quite a while, but I think you probably get the point. It's not just an empty sales pitch, but these are the people who keep the power structure in its toes, and they change the course of history if we let them. And that brings me to the next part of this talk, which is the revolution in acceptance and rights of whistleblowers. When I first came to GAP in 1979, whistleblowers were generally considered, the conventional wisdom is they were either nuts or traitors. They're either sentenced on the or upstairs, or they were viewed like Benedict Arnold or Judas or something like that. Now, there are some folks, there's exceptions, but that was the conventional rule. That was the rule, the conventional wisdom. Well, I knew that things had really changed in January 2003 when Times Persons of the Year came out. It was 3 women whistleblowers. Things have changed all over the place. When I came in '79, women didn't have good enough jobs to be significant whistleblowers. But by 2003, Colleen Raleigh was the regional general counsel for the FBI. Sharon Watkins was the vice president of Enron. And Cynthia Cooper was the chief auditor for MCI. And they were the co-persons of the year because they were changing the course of history. And they were being recognized for their impact and the consequences when we didn't listen to them. Ms. Raleigh wanted to lead a raid and get the blueprints for 9/11 a week before 9/11. She was ordered not to by the FBI. Ms. Watkins warned Ken Lay that the company is going to go bankrupt. They didn't change their ways and start damage control. Well, his reaction was the classic one. Call outside counsel and find a way to get rid of her. Well, that's what happened when we didn't listen to these folks. We had 9/11. Enron went bankrupt. Poor Ken Lay. He died in disgrace before he could go to jail after being convicted of felonies. That's a reason for the next point that I'll say, and what to me is a real cultural revolution, accepting these folks. After the 2006 elections, the Democracy Corps did a survey of the swing voters who had changed control of Congress from the Republicans to the Democrats. It's a very established, respected polling firm for Democrats. And this is letting the Democrats know, here's what you got to do if you want to stay the majority. And so they asked the swing voters, people who'd switched parties, what are your priorities? The number one priority, by 81%, was stopping illegal spending. The number two priority, ahead of ending the Iraq War, cutting taxes, national health insurance, all these other things I would have predicted, better protecting whistleblowers. It was clear to me that what I was seeing in the movies, with the whistleblowers being the hero movie after movie, that this was becoming the conventional wisdom. These are people who are the public's eyes and ears, defending us from when we're betrayed in secret. And it's for that reason that in our campaign to overhaul the federal whistleblower laws, we recruited 400 organizations with 80 million members, telling the politicians, these are the people serving us. If you want us to think you're serving us, you better give them some rights. And that leads to the last part of the talk, which is there's been a legal revolution in freedom of speech, at least at the corporate level. Since the millennium, we passed a dozen laws that now give free speech rights to the private sector workers in the U.S. They cover the first one was, well, start with Sarbanes-Oxley law, covering 40 million workers, all the employees of publicly traded corporations. If they challenge misconduct, which could threaten the value of the stock of those companies. Or the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, covering the 20 million workers in the manufacturing and retail sector. Or there's the stimulus law for all $700 billion in stimulus spending. Gave state-of-the-art, gold standard whistleblower rights to all the people to protect that spending. Or on that same level, defense contractors. They got a whistleblower law allowing them to go to court if they're challenged. And that's about $400 billion of our $700 billion annually in contracts is with the Pentagon. Or the Dodd-Frank law, which overhauled the financial industry. That's got 2 whistleblower sections in it and a bounty, 2 bounty provisions also, which are leading to a tremendous increase in SEC enforcement actions. Or there's the health reform law, whistleblower protection in it. They now cover whistleblower rights in the 9/11 law were added for the railroad workers, mass transit, trucking, cross-country bus drivers. We've got them for the airlines industry, the oil pipeline industry. freedom of speech in the private sector has become the rule of law rather than the exception. And the cornerstones of these statutes, which aren't identical, it's the flaw in our legal system. They're not uniform. I say there's no two whistleblower laws that are alike. They're like snowflakes. They're all different. But the common principles are no loopholes, protected speech, which includes making disclosures connected with carrying out your job duties, which has been a big loophole in free speech rights for government workers lately. Second, that they'll have the right to a jury trial to enforce their rights, that they'll be able to have justice determined by the citizens whom they purport to be defending, instead of by administrative law judges who are sort of part of the power structure they're challenging. The third, that they have very modern and pro-employee burdens of proof that our group actually got first passed in the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989 for federal workers. They've now become the norm for corporate workers. And remedies, so that when you win, you won't be any worse off on the direct or indirect consequences of what happened to you, and that you can get interim relief while your case plays itself out, so you don't have to wait so long to win that it doesn't matter anymore. It's too late. Well, this trend has been extended at the global level, and we're right at the end of a 12-and-a-half-year campaign to extend those rights to the federal workers, too. In fact, if folks are interested in the questions and answers, we passed that law unanimously 8 times in the House or Senate, in different Congresses at different moments. In the last 4 Congresses, 2004, 6, 8, and 10, the mandate has been blocked by secret holds at the end of the session. So we're hoping this year we'll reach the moment of truth with enough lead time that it won't be possible for any last-minute sabotage extending the corporate free speech rights to federal government workers. Ernie Fitzgerald is a whistleblower at the Pentagon who was my mentor, one of my early clients, my mentor and teacher. He exposed the world's most expensive nuts, bolts, coffee pots, toilet seats, things that you could get from 50 cents to $5 at the hardware store, but cost $500 to $5,000 when the Pentagon would buy them. And Ernie's the one who came up with the title to this book, Committing the Truth, which, by the way, there should be copies in the bookstore here at Syracuse, or you can get it on Amazon if you're interested. And that's very ironic, because whistleblowers are the human factor that's the Achilles heel of bureaucratic corruption. Some of the most heroic whistleblowers I've worked with have come from the most repressive, corrupt government agencies. And I don't know how they maintained their values in that environment, but they did. And they were a match then for those agencies. And if there are lessons that I've learned at GAP, the first one hit me right away was the wisdom of the Justice Brandeis insight, quotation, that if corruption is a social disease, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The other is what I've learned from experience. I should be the most cynical guy in Washington, D.C. No way more than anybody's supposed to. And actually, the more I've worked with whistleblowers, the more idealistic I've become. So what they've taught me is that in a free society, nothing is more powerful than the truth. It's more powerful than money. It's more powerful than conventional authority, unless it's a secret. Then it's dangerous to know too much. Thanks for hearing me out, folks, and now it's your turn. Yes, sir.
Does your organization file quicksand actions or help individuals to do something?
We have filed some, and for better or worse, though, we're really not into money too much. So we generally refer those cases to Taxpayers Against Fraud, an NGO which specializes in the False Claims Act. What we've done in connection with the False Claims Act, we'll file cases where the fraud in the government contract involves violation of a provision in the contract that says we will comply with all environmental and public health and safety laws. And we filed some of those cases. We also filed a lawsuit that made us kind of unpopular with the Keatam bar, challenging the practice by the Justice Department of, the practice that you can't disclose the facts of the fraud when you challenge when you file a false claims suit until the Justice Department decides if it wants to adopt and take over the lawsuit. So when you file it, it immediately goes under seal until Justice makes up its mind. Well, they take their own sweet time about this, sometimes years. And in the meantime, the whistleblower is gagged. It's one of the ultimate ironies that you're gagged under the whistleblower law. And that's fine if it's just about money, because the longer the fraud goes on, the more the government will recover. It's treble damages. So you make more money in return the longer that it continues. But what if the fraud is dumping toxic materials into the water supply, or making money out of engaging in commerce with contaminated food, or is one of our False Claims Act suits brought up cutting the methadone in the heroin addiction treatments until it wouldn't stop addiction, because the hospital wanted to use it for other commercial purposes, so they let the addicts cope, not cope. Well, in those cases, a gag order is really horrible consequences that seal. And we went to court and actually prevailed in a lawsuit that the facts of public health and safety threats cannot be gagged. So we've had some overlap with the False Claims Act, but I'm more a cheerleader for the statute than a litigator under it. Yes?
I wanted to ask you about your idealism a little bit, because it sounded like the picture you painted of the world was no room for idealism at all. I mean, there are these individual heroes, whistleblowers, but it seems as if you're presenting, and I wonder if this is what you actually think, is that most people with power will abuse it, and that's kind of a dark claim. And so is that true? Is that kind of your sense that most people with power do inevitably abuse it, and your idealism comes from the fact that there are those who will stand up to that?
And are able to stand up to it. Yeah, I think of power like the Ring and the Tolkien trilogy. You just can't handle it. No matter what you were, you get power and it's going to twist you. And there's exceptions to that, of course, but it's just such a common phenomenon. And the whistleblowers are able to neutralize that abuse of power. But, Professor, it's not just because of individual heroism. And what makes me idealistic is really the potential of our democracy. The way we help whistleblowers win is I'm always working to get stronger laws protecting them and everything, but I've learned long ago that that's not the most significant factor. The magic word for whistleblowers to get away with committing the truth and to make a difference is solidarity. The black magic word is isolation. And if you have solidarity, even without legal rights, you're probably going to prevail you're going to be able to survive, land in a functional spot. If you're isolated, no matter how strong the law is, you're in really, really big trouble. And our strategy to, act on that is so elementary and so easy that it has to make you feel more idealistic, because anybody who wants to can do it. It's easy to draw. See this little dot here? That's the whistleblower. Just the dot. This circle, that's the organization. Corrupt organization where the employee works. And if it's corrupt, all the pressure is to keep the truth inside the circle. Don't let anybody else know what's going on in here. And what do we do at GAP? Well, we're information matchmakers. And we're lawyers too, but we're primarily information matchmakers. And our mission is hooking up the isolated whistleblower with all the institutions in society that should be benefiting from that person's knowledge. And so what are we doing? All we're really doing is expanding the circle. And we get that knowledge out to everyone. Other people who've got power, for sure. Everyone who should be benefiting from it. Whether it's NGOs, citizens organizations who are deeply committed to preventing the consequences that are going to become inevitable with secrecy, with all the government, all the politicians from the city council to the federal level, all of the law enforcement and regulatory agencies, the media. It's everybody who will listen, who should be, whose relevant for the whistleblower's disclosure. We want to get the word out to them. We develop coalitions around our campaigns, like fighting a nuclear power plant in Cincinnati. We've got a coalition of 50 organizations, ranging from the Firefighters Union to the City Club, the blue bloods of the city, and the Grey Panthers, in the AARP chapter there, because they were worried for their members. And when that happens, we've gotten this out. It doesn't have to be, the tactics don't have to be idealistic. I call what we do a lot of times out Machiavelling the Machiavellis. As we'll go to the rival offices within a regulatory agency and let them know that their competitor is covering something up. And it's just amazing that they blow the whistle more righteously than we would even, than we would have the nerve to. And it's a very cutthroat world inside these corrupt agencies. So we help them against each other. And when we're successful doing that, instead of the corrupt bureaucracy surrounding the whistleblower, balance of power shifts. It's society surrounding the corrupt bureaucracy. And when that dynamic is successful, their walls are a house of cards. It's just so surprising to me. Give an example of when I got some really powerful evidence against the Bechtel Corporation, which was the most powerful company in the world at the time. It was the early 80s. They were dominating President Reagan's cabinet, building electrical infrastructures and highway systems all over the world. They were going to complete this nuclear power plant very illegally, as we learned. And we got the goods on it, got the smoking goods. I was so excited about it. I had to call back to Gap. Well, the phone had been cut off because we didn't have the money to pay the phone bill. And we won. The whistleblowers won. Bechtel had to give up and cancel completion of the nuclear power plant. The power of information is, there's no underestimating it if it's used strategically and effectively. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned getting information out, and I'm guessing
I'm sorry?
I'm guessing the internet is a huge factor in getting that information out. So
Well,
how
the
is-
internet's a real game changer.
Yeah.
It makes it much more possible for us to spread the word. Our primary partners in getting the truth out is the media. They've always been our partners. They've been the lifeline to the public. But now with the internet, there's so many more medias that are available, and we can kind of create our own. So, for example, Gap had its own TV show, Whistle Where You Work. It was just a web TV show, but it would have in-depth interviews with the whistleblowers. They were really laying out all the evidence for anybody who wanted to know that. It's also been a game changer in terms of the potential to abuse freedom of speech. I'm very grateful to WikiLeaks for some of the things that have been a result of their disclosures, like the Arab Spring, which I think they deserve a lot of credit for. But they haven't accepted any responsibility for the contents of their releases. There's too many groups that are like that. Freedom means, the flip side of freedom is responsibility, self-discipline in how you exercise it. You don't abuse your freedom any more than you abuse your power. And I remember how furious I was when Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby exposed Valerie Plame, because all the innocent people who worked with her were going to be murdered now, those two jerks. Well, was it any better when Julian Assange did it, even though his purposes were noble, or may have been noble, I'm not sure. He said they were. The ends don't justify the means, and the internet has given us the capacity to abuse those freedoms. And that was actually the pretext for the counterattack against the Whistleblower Protection Act for federal workers at the end of 2010. Is some of the members of the House Intelligence Committee said, this isn't a Whistleblower Protection Act, this is a WikiLeaks Protection Act. And this is the Democrats, they're soft on WikiLeaks, and led to a big uproar. So it has been a game changer for better and worse. Yes, sir.
Enron kept the program for 10 years.
I'm sorry?
Enron kept the program for 10 years. Olympus considered the program for 20 years. And so even after 20 years, stockholder of Olympus, they didn't support the Blackwell, the former CEO, to come back to be a CEO again. Mm-hmm. So the potential whistleblower, they better wait for their condition getting better, because international media criticize Olympus, but Japanese domestic media and the Japanese authority was reluctant to accuse Olympus. So potential whistleblower better analyze the situation and wait for the whistleblowing timing, even though I had the evidence, but I better analyze the situation. I better wait for the timing.
Thank you for making that point. It reminds me of something I needed to share, that our first duty at GAP is to try and talk people out of blowing the whistle. Not because we want to succeed, because part of our responsibility is to make sure that they're making an informed decision. Their eyes are wide open what they're getting into. It's not right for us to use people, the ends justifying the means. So I talk with the families, hours of heart-to-heart discussions with them to make what'll be maybe the highest stakes and most dangerous choice of their lives. After you do this, it'll never be the same. Most folks can't go back to work in an environment that they're just defeated in legal warfare. That's just not realistic for them. Oftentimes they're risking blacklisting. But on the other hand, if they keep it to themselves, remain silent observers, it may be haunting them the rest of their lives. So our job at GAP, our first job, is to help the potential whistleblower to learn what course of action is necessary to be true to him or herself. And that's why I say, my job isn't to get you to blow the whistle, it's to help you be true to yourself. And if doing that means blowing the whistle, I'm your man, and we're gonna go whole hog on it. But I'm not gonna have to live with the consequences that you do, and let's go into that. So that's part of our responsibility. And as far as timing, well, if you wait for things to keep getting better and better, I don't know that there's ever going to be a time when it's safe. Whistleblowing is much more popular publicly now, but the people who are the targets of the dissent, it's not going to be safe with them. It's kind of going against basic animal instincts. I think I've stopped thinking that retaliation is evil or immoral. I think it's laws of nature. Organizations or leaders of organizations behaving just like animals do when they're threatened. Well, they did. Eliminate the threat. Kill it. Get it out of there. And when somebody hits me, I'll think, well, maybe I had it coming. And I should figure out what I did wrong that sparked this reaction from that person so it won't happen again. No, that's not the way I react. I want to flatten that son of a gun. Two reasons. One is he or she hurt me, and I'm mad about it. The second is I don't want them to have a chance to hit me again. So I got to take them out before they take me out. That's the natural, instinctual, knee-jerk response to whistleblowing. And it's a real challenge, I think. I don't know that we'll ever get past that instinct. But a big part of our job, as I was saying earlier, about talks to business leaders, is to change the dynamics from being just critics to being those who warn and those who expose problems and help to solve them. And that's always our dynamic in working with whistleblowers, if it's possible, to try and change this person's identity from being a threat to being a resource for the organization, a problem solver.
We're
Yes, sir.
actually out of time, so I'm going to encourage people to continue to engage our speaker during the reception. But right now I ask you to join me in thanking him.